In this video, I'm taking you through a second refinement of an aligner case. I've already sent it back 5 times. I have to get it approved for manufacturing. The time is running out. This refinement has got 50 stages and I can predictably work with 30 to 35. It's not an ideal situation to be in. That's the way that you want to have it look in the mouth. You want to see where each cuspid ends, and then afterwards I will go and I put in my overcorrections. I want to get these teeth down. I want to make them longer. This is the final positions of the teeth. This is where I started and going to the final. I need to approve this case. I've already sent it back 5 times. This is now going to be the 6th time. And the patient needs to get his aligners within 2 weeks' time. They have to be manufactured. So what are my checkpoints that I use? I try always to be systematic, or sometimes you do get lost in the process. But the system that I have for myself is to look at the individual arches from a bird's eye view. Then I focus in and I look closer. And I do that for the maxillary, then for the mandibular arch. So, and I do that from different views. So first I have a look at it as it is here in a frontal view. And I'll isolate the upper arch and I'll say, let's look at it bird's eye view. Do I have a symmetry? Let's go there. Is the central symmetric to the central? Lateral to the lateral? I'm quite happy with that. The incisal edges are similar. Are the canines on the same height? Do I have symmetry in my height there? Then I move to the premolars, 1.5 millimeters. There I'm slightly out, so I'll have to push up a little bit. Then I move my line down and I'll go and check on the 5s. Again, I'm slightly out. I'll have to push up the 5 there to get onto that line. And I think if I'm going to check the 6s, again, I'm slightly out. So let's just fix all of that. Good. In terms of the occlusal heights, I'm good. Then I look at my posterior teeth. Do I see the same amount of tooth structure? If I look at the canine, I know there's difference in opinion of how much of the facial view you have to see. I see more of the distal aspect of this one. And if I look at the contact point, I think I may be at the same level. Let's put the gums there. Then I may have a better view on it. There we go. And let's remove the roots and let's have a look at it from this viewpoint. I'm still in the final positions and there I'm picking up something that I don't see on that side. So let's click there and see. This is the 6, and if I slightly move it over and I look at the symmetry there, I can see the curve of Wilson present and an over-exaggerated cusp hanging there. So let's look at it straight from the front again, upper view, and that must be then reflected in this contour here, there. So I try to have an even contour there, which this one is similar to that one. Maybe that one is slightly off. If I do that, I may have it similar, but now that one needs to. But if I do that, then I get an even more hanging cusp there. This tooth also doesn't seem to be fitting in. If I look at that line there, this one is not symmetric. There I've got a bigger symmetry. I need to get that one right. And that one is on the same. Yeah, let me fix it, get it slightly more in line, but it's still hanging there. And that one is slightly stepped up. I'll check the marginal ridges a little bit later. So that is a problem for me, which means there must be some anatomy form that throws it out. I love to look at my curve from this side. You can see the smoothness of the line there, and there I have it out. So now I've got a view that I can fix that. That definitely have to come in there, and there I've got a much better looking situation. So let's view again from the front, and it's much less visible there, although something is still off. Okay, we're going to get to the marginal ridge heights. As I told you, it's not always that easy to stick to one plane because they are all interrelated to each other. So there's a definite discrepancy in the marginal ridge heights there, which I'm going to have to sort out. But let's just first have a look at what I wanted to check here. Get back my grid and then look at the 4s online. Look at the 5. That 5 needs to come down. That 5 needs to come down to be on the same height. And that 5, and then the 6 there needs to go up. There we go. And let's have a look. And I've got a much better line of my fissures, the buccal-occlusal line in line, and I'm much more happy with that. Okay, so that was from the frontal view. Looking at a bird's eye view from far off, do I have symmetry there? Let's do the same for the bottom arch. At this stage, looking at it, and I can just imagine what you guys think about this position of these teeth. I've built in so much overcorrection that, and it's so often the case that with the type of movements that are unpredictable, like talking and intrusion, extrusion, you have to overtreat. You have to overcorrect. And it creates a look in your setup that's not attractive. It's not something that you want to show to colleagues that's not aware of what's going on or even closely to the patient. And that makes it sometimes difficult because they want a visualization. So if this was a first design case, I would have stopped at the point where it looks good, and that's the way that you want to have it look in the mouth. And I'll show it to the patient. And then afterwards, I will go and I put in my overcorrections and movements that I need to make to avoid the unpredictability of the types of movements. So let's just forget about the look, the very wide square arch, and immediately I pick up a more smooth line. That 5 is out, that 6 is out, or this 5 is maybe out. This is like a rhomboid arch, and I know that there are some players that looks at this a lot and they want it that way. I tend to nowadays also to go into that. But yeah, first now, I see I have to stick to my original plan. This is difficult with the incisal edges having been altered through occlusion. So I'll move up the case, hiding the incisal edges, that it doesn't distract my eye, and then I'll look at the lines. Do I see a symmetry? In the aesthetic zone, which is the maxilla, let's just go maybe back there and remove the bottom one. Well, the teeth are beautiful. That's not a problem in the case of here, but hide that, and then you can look at your gingival contour. And there I see this canine, this lateral is slightly lower than that one. Then I'll check it there. And with the teeth having so little worn edges, I can go along with that, or I can maybe this one is shorter than that one. If I bring her down, there's going to be even a bigger discrepancy there. First point. Secondly, there is a lot of extrusion in this case, which is already unpredictable. So the detail of this, if it was just like a 10, 15 aligner case, I would have definitely gone to more trouble to make sure that this is perfect. Okay, back to the bottom one. So hiding the incisal edges, and I see a symmetry. In restorative dentistry, it's very difficult for the dentist to build up the incisal edge, to have it not break off over time, you don't want to do a veneer or a composite, you're going to lose it. And this is not an aesthetic zone, so I'd rather have the gingival line not aligned up, but the incisal line. What one can do if you want to is, I wouldn't do it in this case, looking at that chipping away is, yeah, this is maybe a restoration, because the amount that I'm going to have to extrude it to be able to shape it is going to be too much. So let's rather not do that. I think most probably just smooth off that area, smooth it off there, and then the patient will be happy with that. Yeah, so let's go back to this view. Canine, premolar, a lot of talk there, over talked. But if you see the amount of movement that I have there, okay, sorry, back to the frontal view. So there we go. I'm happy with the view. I'm going to go, if I look at the occlusal, I'll sort out that other. So in a bird's eye view from far away, this looks good enough. Now I'm going to have a look at the occlusal, and I have an asymmetry from left to right, definitely around the 6s and the 5s. I have to fix that. Firstly, I'm going to try and bring this one slightly in, bring that one out slightly to get a line for the embouchures, or the, no, not the embouchures, for the occlusal line. Bring that one slightly in, bring that one slightly out, and have my fissures lined up. Have a buccal occlusal line lined up there, maybe need a small bit of rotation there. The problem with what I've done now, I've went out of the area where I can recalculate. I have to submit. And that's not something that I want to do. I need to get this case approved. So let's see how far I have to go in this changes. Just a quick interruption. If you found this video helpful this far, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content like this. Here we go. I am going to say recalculate, and let's see what happens. As long as I can keep this blue, then I don't need to go back and send it in. I can directly approve it. So let's see. I am still slightly off here. Let's see what happens if I just do a minor. The moment I do that, I go into submit. Let's see. If I take this one in slightly. No, submit. That is way too much. I'm going to have to submit it for this. I hate this. I hate this. But there's still a lot of work to need to be done. So it's not final approval, but let me still take you through the steps. It's so important. I should have been much more careful the previous time. Lessons learned. Okay, immediately I do that. I know it affects the way that they meet with the upper teeth, but that will come in when I look at the inter-arch relationship. So I've got a more symmetric position here. That doesn't feel 100% symmetric. There's arch that's more straight. But let's for the moment stick to this. Okay, so now I need to go into the more closer look, and then I start looking at the embouchures. I didn't do that in the upper. So if you look at your contact point there, we still have a fissure line that doesn't line up with that one. So let me take it slightly in while we already have that. There's a height difference, marginal ridge height. I'll fix that when I look at it from the buccal side. So I've got a much more smoother line here. There's still a rotation. While I'm out of my approval thing, I'm going to just fix that one as well. And now I've got a bit of more symmetry there. Okay, so what I do now that I've done with the occlusal view, and I zone in on my marginal ridge heights. There you can see why it's out there. That tooth is tilted back. Yeah, and I'll explain that later. This is also an overcorrection, and we'll get to that when we go to the movement. So I'm not going to fix that now. There is a marginal ridge height difference there. Let me rather overcorrect a bit here as well. So this is a difficult zone to get 100% correct, and that's because I've got a lot of movement on these two teeth, visualizing them. That contact point marginal ridges are fine, and here I'm totally out. Again, it's difficult to fix it because I've got a lot of extrusion here and I have overcorrected, so I can't check, make sure that it's fine. But let's do this. Let's just get that maybe slightly in a better position. Here I've got an odd-shaped tooth, and that's bringing that more out. So let's just do that. Then I can just work that off for the patient. And there we go. Marginal ridge heights. Let's focus on the back ones. This tooth needs to be slightly more rotated, a better contact, better embouchure. And that is it. Let's just double check the upper one. Yeah, let me just check it from the back. To have a smooth line running there. Admittedly, this is a lot of buccal root torque in it, but it is an overcorrection. And again, that one should be slightly less to have it more in a smooth line. And there we go. All right, so that was individual arches. Let me just check. I check the embouchures, I check the cusp aligned, the fissures aligned, and the incisors. Yeah, that one is very difficult. The last one that I try to do always is to check the contact point where it flows from the posterior teeth into the anterior teeth, especially between the canines and the laterals, is an important point for stability there. And due to the extrusion and the amount of extrusion that I need to do here, this looks good. It's a good contact point for stability there and there as well. But I'll have to see how it plays out. It's a bit difficult, that. All right, now I've checked the individual arches, and I'm going to have to check now the inter-arch relationships. So I want an class 1 occlusion, my cusps fitting into a pretty angle class 1, this side as well, and I'm happy with that with this overcorrection here. Let me maybe show it to you guys what happens there as I go through and I visualize these teeth by a line at 25. All the movement and all the teeth are done. And then from 25 to 50 is only the 6 and the 7 visualizing them. And when you visualize molars, especially mandibular molars. Upper molars, I don't find it that hard. When you visualize a mandibular 6 or 7, you always have to add a correction of 3 to 4 degrees of uprighting for each millimeter you move it. So let's see. In the final position, and if I check that tooth and I go and look at the tooth movement table and the 3, 6 and its medial distal movement 3 millimeters and 3.2. Medial distal movement 3 and 3.2. So if you make it 3 millimeters forward and I say I want to overcorrect 3 times only 2 degrees, it's 6 degrees that I have to tilt that tooth further back to overcorrect it, to make sure that that tilt is, that I don't lose control of that tooth. And that is what's causing the cuspal height differences or the marginal ridge height differences there. And that doesn't play out in the tooth in the final position. But this is one of the things of aligners. You don't know how much it's going to play out. So you'll have to see. So this is definitely not my last refinement. I'm trying to be as accurate as possible that I can, in my last refinement, have as little as possible movements to do those steps. So now, if I look at the inter-arch relationships, it's easy to look at it from the buccal. And with fixed braces, it is always easy. That's what we had to look at, is the buccal way how teeth interdigitate. And there was brackets and there was wires and sometimes gums that were swollen and there was plaque present. So it was difficult. You had to check it out and you have to retract the cheek, and it's very difficult to see to the very last tooth. In my personal opinion, aligners makes it so much more predictable, and we're not only doing macro-orthodontics anymore. Fixed braces are macro-orthodontics. You look at a macro level. When you do aligners and you start looking at your cuspal relationships, you want to check it from the inside and you want to see where each cuspid ends. And you want to have it in a fossa, preferably, or on a marginal ridge. You want to have it on a flat surface so that when that tooth lands, there's not an incline that makes it move medially, distally, buccally, or lingually, because that is what causing relapse or movement post-orthodontic. You want that, the cusp there at the deepest point possible where it can end. So in the fossa, slightly more towards an edge-to-edge class 2 type of relationship. What is described in the literature is a cusp on the marginal ridges. Then it have to land in there. Again, a lot of overcorrection built in. This is a class where I'm going to make use of, let's just go there. I'm going to use class 2 elastics here, and that changes all of that relationships. And the same on the other side, I'm going to use class 2 elastics here. So what I have here, initially I'm going to work on a short class 2 to help that premolar come forward and extrusion. With a short elastic, your vertical angle is much more, so you get a more vertical component of force with your medial or distal force. If I continue, when I go on and I go past aligner number from 15 and then to 25, I change the elastic from the canine to the 6, and that changed the vertical component. So a longer class elastic, a longer with a smaller slope, gives you less of a vertical force. So in this area from 25 to 50, I've got no other teeth movement than those 2 molars coming forward to close the gaps there. Okay, so that said is going back to the micro-orthodontics. Again, in this case, it's very difficult to evaluate, but I'm at least in the line of occlusion there, and on this side the same. So I'll show you in other cases how I try to perfect that. So that's the intra-art relationships. Then the next step is I look at the movement. This is all the static positions, and then I start looking at the movements of the teeth. So I see most orthodontists, if I watch them and I see them online, that is what they do. This is what you do. You just take your slider, you start there, and you run through your movements and you see what's happening. It's like a wave, but that's exactly what I'm doing here. It's a wave of moving this midline over to the patient's right-hand side. Because of the presence of the wisdom tooth there, I can't distalize to fix this interdigitation. So the only way for me to fix this is to move the bottom midline over to that side. So there we go, and it goes, and it goes. Let's just remove the upper one, and let's just focus on the bottom teeth going, moving, and let's see how many teeth are moving at the same time. And here you can see if we take it there, go to the initial and we go to the final, that I've got quite a bit of expansion on this side. And if you expand, you expansion mostly is a tipping movement. And to be able to get a bodily movement is why I'm overcorrecting and why I have that terrible amount of torque expression in there. Because this, from there to there, is a total bodily movement, but it's going to tip it over there, and that's why I am doing that amount of torque there. Much less expansion on this side. And yeah, so let's go back to the checking of the movements that I've got here. A lot of en masse movement here. I'll have to go slow by 2 weekly change. And then on this side, the 6 and the 7 don't move. I need a bit of anchorage to create force going this way. And I want to control their mesialization. So I'm happy with this. Up to there. And let's just check the tooth movement table and have a look at the 4-1. The mesial distal movement is 1.5 millimeter, which is really not that much. So to have all these teeth going simultaneously, I'm happy to do that. All right, so let's continue. And then I go into that movement there. And most probably when I get to the stage where I am moving this, I may consider to use a power arm on that tooth to the canine, add it to my class 2 elastics. It all depends on how that molar moves. But a power arm with a force being more closer to the rotation middle point. Your center of resistance, if you don't put your force through the center of resistance, the tooth starts tipping. And the center of resistance is 2/3 down the root towards the apex. So if I can apply the force closer to that point and bring the root forward, it's going to help me control the movement. And the way that we do that is with a power arm. It's just a little button on the buccal side of the 6 with the arm extending down another little button. And I can do that on the 6 and I can do the same on the canine. And I run an elastic, which is an oral hygiene problem. I can use a little coil spring, a closing coil spring there, or whatever. When I get to that stage, I've got many tools in my box that I can use to close that space and control that movement. But I'm first going to try it with the aligners, with the overcompensation I've built in. But at this stage of the patient, when he's wearing those aligners, I will follow him up very closely to see what's going to happen there. So I'm happy with the movements in the bottom arch. I need to check the upper arch, what's going to happen there, and there we go. Okay, what is happening here? Let's make this bigger. If we go there and we bring the bottom arch in, this for me is an open bite. And if we look at the contact points there, to have a stable position for your mandibular incisor, the same concept that works for the back teeth, where you want your cusp to land in the deep point that it can't go anywhere, not backwards, not forwards, not medially, lingually, palatally, nowhere. You need to have the mandibular incisor to end on the cingulum. And orthodontist tends to open the bite way too much to allow for over-eruption. In my viewpoint, that is because they don't torque the teeth enough. Torque is one of the most important principles in orthodontics. If you don't know about torque, you don't know, you can't do orthodontics. So if you have a proper torque on the teeth, you can end up with a proper closed bite, not an open bite, and it won't deepen over time. If you get your incisal edge to land on the cingulum, and if you look at the case here, this patient don't have very anatomically expression of his cingulum, but the ideal position, let's see. Now in this case, again, overcorrection, so I can't have it in the right position. So let's see, where would I have it more or less? And I can't simulate it here because there are other mechanics here. But let me just quickly see if I can get... Let's ignore that little worn point there. Let's maybe focus. Let's move those teeth back and let's go for the 4-1 and 4-2 and see if I can move them into a position. Now I've clicked the button too many times and the wheel is spinning. There we go. Let's see if I can. Give you an indication of what I would say would be an ideal relationship from the back. I wish there was a proper cingulum. That's what makes orthodontics so difficult. Let's see. Again, yeah, this is maybe not the right case. I'm not going to try and show it to you guys here because there are too many things that I need to change to get to that point. So let's rather just go back here. And I'll explain the principle at a later stage. So I can't be precise in the landing spots. There's going to be elastics involved in this case. I can't check on the final landing spot of the incisor on the cingulum and not on the side. So I'm going to have to suffice with what I've got. And I was at this point where I wanted to explain what's happening with the maxillary teeth. Let's overlay. This is where we start and look at where we go. I'm going to reverse this to have a more, that's the amount of extrusion that I'm doing to trying to close this bite. Let's have a look again at the tooth movement table. For the maxilla, and we choose the 2-1 and the okay, doesn't show very nicely with the begin and end, but let's have a look at the extrusion table occlusal gingival movement. It's a 2.2 millimeter of extrusion. In the literature, it's very specific that any movement more than, I think it's 1 millimeter extrusion is unpredictable. I think I may have a slide of that. I'm not sure. No. I'll get it and I'll add it to the video. The unpredictability of these movements. Let me just see, maybe I've got it. Estimated torsion. No, I don't have. So extrusion of 2.2, 2.5, 2.6, 2.9. That is a massive amount of extrusion. But that is my overcorrection. And if you look at when the teeth comes together, you can see this is deeper than the half to 3/5 of millimeters that we need. And you can see at the back it's way too much. But I've got no way of getting it to the final. I'll have to see how it plays out. So in this sense, making use of unpredictable movements makes it very difficult to get a final check on this. So then, but let me explain to you what I did with the extrusion. Because it's such a difficult type of movement, I want to get these teeth down. I want to make them longer. There's no grip. There's no surface on which the aligner can move. And I've said it many times, aligners push. There's no surface to push on. So what did I do to do that? I've proclined these teeth massively. Look at that proclination, going back there, there. Oh well, let's go there. Now, at 15, I've got a surface to push on. And I add my attachments and I've got something more to push on. And then I start pushing them down. And that down movement also causes for them to go back because of the vertical component as well as the palatal component of force, and I end up with it touching each other. Something that's also part of the unpredictability, but what I'm trying to create for this patient is, if you look at the tightness of the overbite there and you look at the amount of space that I'm creating there, is to allow, it's a male. Males tend to grow later than females. And there's always mandibular growth till a later stage of life. And by ending up with this, a very tight bite in the front, you create trauma for that patient. You create a situation where he's going to wear his teeth away. So added to that, the elastics, I'm not using class 3 elastics, unfortunately. I'm going to use class 2s there because I want to control this backward movement and on this side as well. But for that reason as well, I have to check out the wear of the elastic so much more that I can end up with a bit of an overbite for this patient. Okay, so now I've checked the movements. The extrusion and then the retraction of those teeth. And that's a major type of movements that happens in the upper arch. So let's just quickly double check from this view. Yeah, going forward, retracting, round tripping, that's it. And a lot of rotation on this molar. And there we go. And what happens? There's elastics in. Let's go. I'll check it out when I see the patient. This is virtual chain elastic to close the gaps. And it's exactly the same that power chain does in a patient in the final stages. You've worked through your braces, step by step, going through round, bigger round, square, bigger, square, till you get to your 1925 to establish a proper torque. And then you add this power chain around it and you pull everything together and you lose your torque. I don't see the point of that. And you can see in the bottom here with this checkered flag pattern there, that is power chain to close the gaps, and see how much it brings those teeth together. So I will at stage of 55, check and see, do I have open contact points, and I will most probably not apply this. Let's just see. 3 aligners. That's maybe not too much. I'll check it when I'm there. Good. So now I've checked the movements. What is left are the attachments and the occlusal contacts. So let's have a look at the occlusal diagram. Let's just use one arch. There I am at the beginning of the treatment, and let's see what happens. Developing contact points there and there, running, going on, and I have high contacts there, which I expect because of the extrusion, the overcorrection, and I end up with hardly any contacts at the back. So I'm not going to change this because these contacts most probably are not going to happen because of the over extrusion. And then the jaw will be able to close down further and I will get contacts at the back. So that is also something in an extensive case like this with the amount of overcorrection, type of movements that you don't know what's going to happen. You can't do the finalization. So let's check the attachments and the elastics needed. Let me just check. There was this one molar that had a lot of rotation on it. This attachment on that molar does not, it's not going to give me the rotation that I need. So I'm going to make a note. Even more, I'm not going to finalize this case. Add a vertical attachment on the 2-6 to manage the rotation. I can do a rotational attachment. I don't know if they always work, and let me just see what for the rest of it. So this is just a retention attachment to keep the aligner in place at the back. Add a vertical, no, I'm going to say add a rotational attachment on the 2-6 to manage the rotation. So let's see what are the other movements. I prefer to check it tooth by tooth by tooth, starting from the 1-6. It's a little bit of rotation. If they do the cut line properly, I've got hold on this tooth. I'm not going to do attachment. Attachments on the 7s for me is a problem. They come off easily. And again, when I went through the literature, unfortunately, the movements on the terminal tooth, the last tooth in the arch, whether it's the 7, the 8, or the 6, is very little, if even there are any of the expression of the movements there. So I'll have to see how this tooth, where it ends up. I'm not going to work too hard on it. There's the 2-7 also has got rotation. I'll check the cut line when one of my last steps, and that will also help to give a hold on that tooth. So let's check the 2-6s. That rotation I've sorted out, so let's go to the 5s. Not much movement there. The 4s as well is just buckle, and I've got it over torqued. Let's have a look at the canines. No rotation, only buckle movement, then extrusion and back. So the attachments are good there. Let's have a look at the centrals. For a long time, I had this type of movement, the buccal protrusion, or this protrusive movement on incisors. I used to do it without any attachments because I want a type of an uncontrolled tipping situation. But what I've seen lately, and I'm still working on sorting it out, is that I do get a thin line at the bottom edge of the aligner where the tooth doesn't fit into the deep depth of the aligner, which seems that it's not tracking. My personal view on this is that it is a point of rotation of that tooth, which the software has got a fixed point. And that in reality, the center of rotation where it does happen is not the same, and therefore you get that little difference there. And now I've started to add small little attachments just to give me that little bit of a vertical control to make sure it stays in the aligner, because it's sometimes annoying. You want to make sure the aligner track properly. So I've got my attachments on from the beginning, proclinings, there's aligner attachments for all of them. There I haven't got the extrusion one because that tooth is not going to extrude that much, but the 2-3 needs to go further. So let's just from there. Yeah, that's more vertical movement. That's why it's got that type of attachment on. And let's check these. So I'm happy with the top attachments. Let's check the bottom ones from a occlusal view. Run through. No significant rotations. Yeah, this is part of, no, that's the virtual power chain, closing it there. And it's difficult to evaluate here because of the adjustments that I've made. So it's going to have to come back. I feel sorry for myself. I wanted to finalize the case. This is not good. Okay, but let's do the attachments. Now, all these are no rotations, and I try to steer away from attachments. It seems that there is some extrusion, but it's added with my, I'm helping these movements with my elastics at that stage, so I'm not too much concerned about that. And there they go, remove them, and then I work on that 6 and 7. So I'm happy with that. It all depends on the cut length. I need to check that. So let's just go here. The position of that attachment is to allow for the button there. And then something else that I pick up is 1, 2, 3 blue dots here. So there's a change of, which is not coordinated. And I think it's in this area here. So off with those attachments, on with the others, and one step further, more attachments are being changed. I need to have the changements on 26, not in a different. And then I can't remove the, please do not remove attachment on the 3-7. It's 3-7. It needs to stay on right through the treatment. Not meant to have it as caps locks, but now that is what it is, right through the treatment. Maybe they see it as important, which is great. Please do not remove it. Okay, so let me just check again. Okay. I'm checking the bottom attachments. Okay, now the important thing is I haven't got a lot of attachments on. The cut line is very important, so that's the last thing that I'm going to check. And I have asked previously for it to be cut 1 millimeter onto the gingival line. So let's just check that they've included the back aspect, and that makes it an enclosed system, which gives you much more control. So let's just check the bottom. Yeah, it's enclosed, so I'm happy with that. Good. Thank you guys for listening. I wish I could approve this case. I hope it comes back within a day that I can just press that final button. So I'm going to say submit. There it goes.